we're going to go into our next panel. I'm going to call Mimi Scheller to introduce our next guest speakers.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'll just mention I'm just so excited to be part of the advisory board of the new Center for Transformative Media, and really nice to have this gathering. I'm going to welcome our speaker for this panel, Germaine Halegoua. Germaine's research interests focus on the relationships between people, place, and digital media. She is the John D. Evans Development Professor and Associate Professor of Communication and Media at University of Michigan. In particular, she's interested in how visions of digital media by public officials and urban planners often conflict with popular imaginations and everyday experiences of digital technologies and infrastructures. Her recent work investigates things like digital placemaking, smart cities, cultural geographies, and inequities of digital infrastructure and access, social media in neighborhood contexts, and social productions of place and identity online. Her research and writing have been published in several anthologies, online venues, and journals like New Media and Society, Social Media and Society, International Journal of Cultural Studies, Journal of Urban Technology, etc. And she's the author of The Digital City, published by NYU Press in 2020, Smart Cities, MIT Press 2020, and co-editor of Locating Emerging Media and the Routledge Companion to Media and the City, as well as some great special issues of journals. So we're really excited to have Germaine here. Welcome. And then she's going to give a talk, and then we'll have some brief interventions or questions posed by three panelists from here at Northeastern, and then we'll open up to plenty of time for a Q&A discussion with the audience. So Germaine, thank you. Come on up.
This is what I'm using? Yeah, look at that. Thanks, Anthony, for your talk. And I think that it's kind of great that I'm following Anthony Townsend because his talk was very informative in terms of practical sort of examples. And I think that what I'm going to present, it's a work in progress that I'm working on with a PhD student at Cornell, Ria Gualano, and then Scott Campbell, who's also a member of the advisory board. He's a professor at OSU. But we're thinking sort of, this is more of like a conceptual take on some of the things that Anthony Townsend presented to us. So maybe some of those like question mark, explanation marks, I'm going to sort of like maybe hopefully provide some tools for thinking about those question marks, explanation marks as well. And also, I wanted to present some of this work in progress because it draws on Adriana de Souza Silva's work on hybrid spaces. So, and sort of the revisioning of hybrid spaces as an analytical or conceptual model for thinking about some of the things that Anthony is talking about. So thanks for letting me be here and open to feedback. So what we're thinking about in this paper is about revisiting the concept of hybrid spaces, but also thinking about some of the things that came out of the most recent reboot, and that would be these kind of three categories of access, awareness, and agency, and trying to think about how these categories might actually be like tools for evaluating some of the projects and design thinking that go into what Anthony was talking about in his work. So it's a way to sort of question, like, as urban AI in particular, and AI and algorithmic models are being built into the way that we think about hybrid spaces, or these conjunctions of, or amalgamations of urban space, physical space, mobility, technical, social, and spatial sort of awareness. Like, how can we be questioning and thinking about these things? So maybe everybody in this room is sort of knowledgeable about this, but I just wanted to sort of revisit this concept of hybrid spaces. So originally, like Adriana coined this to push back on traditional assumptions and assertions that online and offline spaces were very different, right? And this is coming about at the time where mobile phones are being popularly adopted, where locative media and mobile services are being adopted within urban spaces, where users are perpetually carrying these mobile computational devices with them. And so this was sort of a theoretical intervention to say, well, it's not just about the blurring of physical and digital spaces, but thinking about these spaces as a confluence of one's mobility, connectivity, and sociability that's brought together through mobile technologies. But one of the things that we want to pull out of this hybrid spaces model is that even back in 2006, when she first introduces this, she talks about these spaces as being characteristic characteristically uneven in how they are experienced socially, spatially, and technologically due to power asymmetries and socioeconomic marginalization. So in practice, what we're doing within these sort of hybrid spaces is that we're actively negotiating productions of a hybrid space that are not necessarily built for a diversity of human bodies or human knowledges or technological knowledges, right? So the effort, labor, and cost involved in these negotiations are differential, right? They're about intersectional identities, intersectional mobilities, intersectional sort of socioeconomic privilege or disparities. So when we're considering, and this is sort of like our maybe re-envisioning, although I think it comes back in the 2025 sort of model, is when you're considering a smart city, let's say, as a hybrid space, it's not just about the overlay of digital and physical spaces, but that you're recognizing the spatial, social, and coded biases of smart urbanism and the ways in which people actively and maybe creatively negotiate these digital spaces that are not necessarily built for them. So when we're thinking about sort of the hybridity of hybrid spaces, we're thinking about those sort of differential negotiations, those differential mobilities, those uneven geographies, and those power asymmetries that like manifest through experiencing all of these overlapping things at once. And also kind of recognizing how this is particularly uneven and particularly a lot more cost and effort for people who aren't imagined within these systems, right? Whose bodies and types of mobilities are not imagined within these systems. And so for our paper, we're looking as a kind of case study of this as people with disability. A variety of different disabilities is one example to look at this. So in the 2025 revisiting of hybrid spaces, Adriana de Souza Silva, Scott Campbell, who's a co-author on this, and then Rich Ling are proposing, like kind of looking a little bit deeper into this sort of power asymmetries within hybrid spaces. So moving away from like, oh, it's a juxtaposition of all these different spatial social mobility environments, and thinking about these three kind of conceptualizations: access, agency, and awareness. And in the paper that they published, they're talking about access as like access and accessibility of network technologies, awareness about whether you're in fact in a hybrid space, which is very much that signage that you pointed to towards the end that comes out of the Waterfront Project, agency to deploy and control networked infrastructures to configure hybrid spaces and extract data from them. And in the paper that we're working on, we're trying to sort of build these out as more like evaluative models, kind of looking at like disability within cities and disability as it intersects with urban AI, and thinking, well, could agency, awareness, and access be kind of used as a tool to sort of evaluate like what is going on in these urban AI systems? Who are they for? Who are they not for? So for us, and then what happens within those kind of spaces as well. So for us, access coincides with definitions from like digital divide and digital inclusion rhetoric, that technology should be available, affordable, and meaningful within everyday lives or in particular communities. So in other words, access is not solely whether something is available to you, but whether a person can interact with it to accomplish common tasks that are meaningful to their everyday lives. And do they have the skills and capacity to use it? And being aware that this is differential, right? That depending on who you are, you might have different sort of levels of access. Awareness, we're thinking about the invisibilization of sensors, cameras, digital infrastructures, software systems, and how these are designed to be invisibilized, that they're ambient, that a lot of the sensing systems that make some of the technologies that Anthony was talking about work are, not apparent to you, right? They happen sort of in the background. And thinking about, what is, if any, the harm in kind of being embedded within a hybrid space, or being embedded within sort of the system that makes you subject to algorithmic technologies that you're not aware of, right? So that issue of transparency, right? Even if you know that you're sort of being surveilled by urban AI systems or sensors, what does that really mean to you if you don't know how they work, or if you don't know what data is being sort of used to fuel those systems, and not knowing whether your data is included or excluded, not from a digital rights perspective, but just knowing whether your voice or whether your sort of body is kind of noted within that system in an accurate, intelligible way that's meaningful to you, and thinking about agency as representing like a step beyond the sense of control and meaningful intervention, but thinking about it in terms of what are the creative ways or what are the ways that you can or cannot appropriate these technologies for your own personal use, whether you can intervene in access and storage and sharing of your personal data, whether you have control over those systems, but also whether you're aware of these hybrid spaces, find them accessible, and then what can you do within them, right? What are the interventions that you're allowed, but also like, what are your sort of rights or what are your ways of controlling refusal or repair or any sort of meaningful intervention at any kind of level? So when we're thinking about something like urban AI, it's important to sort of recognize, and I don't need to maybe recap all the different ways that we see like AI being incorporated into urban spaces, because we heard that so eloquently from the previous conversation and a lot of practical examples. But there's all these different realms, right? It's not just climate change, it's mobility, education, healthcare, governance, deciding housing opportunities, deciding like who gets a bed in a homeless shelter in a major city, right? So AI is being incorporated into a lot of everyday experiences and resource allocation within urban environments, autonomous vehicles, chatbots, robots, delivery systems, drones, city brain systems, streetlights, all of these computational sensor systems as well, and ways of processing this data. Because we're talking about disability and mobility, I think it's important to note also that the US, public transportation systems have also incorporated machine learning and AI. We heard about some examples, but thinking about like overcrowding or hazardous conditions, thinking about signal trafficking, thinking about, or traffic signals, right? Thinking about pedestrian detection, obstacle detection to try and clear that in a way for flow, but also for safety. But we could also be thinking about, and we should be looking at some of the ways that artificial intelligence is incorporated into urban AI for disability. And we do see some of these opportunities, or we do see some of these changes happening, right? So in DC, there's AI-enabled cameras that are used to monitor obstructions in bus lanes. So recognizing that it's important for buses to get as close to the curb as possible. So we have these sort of sensor and AI systems that allow sort of buses to see where the obstacle is and then immediately alert somebody who could come in and move that obstacle, right? So that the ADA requirements can be met, so they can get as close to the curb as they possibly can. And there's other examples. Singapore has a lot of examples of catering to elderly populations, people with limited mobility. Helsinki also with voice recognition on buses and things of that nature. So, and there's lots of sort of other work that highlights some examples of how AI could be used in the service of people with a variety of different disabilities, to either personalize routes or to sense whether streets or certain routes are sloped more for wheelchair users and kind of like avoid those routes. And we've also had a lot of research come out recently, mostly from geographers, but from others as well, that have argued that smart cities may actually be a thing of the past, and we're entering into this new sort of AI urbanism, where autonomous cities and objects that are capable of acting and accounting, as well as sensing and counting, are taking shape. And they become the new standards for urban informatics. So this is definitely something we need to be more aware of, that we're sort of allocating, the argument is allocating a lot of our decision-making processes to automated systems that may or may not represent us. So some of the questions that have come up that I think are really important are, what aspects of our decision-making processes and urban knowledge will be shared or offloaded onto algorithmic systems, which are part of some missing data sets there as well? In what ways will we be expected to learn and collaborate with AI in urban space? And what aspects of urbanism are these machines calibrated to recognize and process, and which are they not? So the fact that urban populations are really heterogeneous, I mean, the expectation can be that, not everyone is going to be represented in this data. So then what do we do, right? We've also known that when we look at artificial intelligence systems of any sort, not just urban AI, but otherwise, there are biases, right? I came from Detroit, I came from Ann Arbor, but Detroit has had like the most false arrests based on facial recognition and the way that facial recognition is incorporated into police departments, right? So there's a technological, institutional, and also racial component, intersectional identity component that illuminates some of these very practical and harmful biases within AI systems that have not necessarily been fixed just yet. It's a technological problem, but it's also a social and infrastructural problem as well. We've also seen the ways that public transit authorities have leveraged urban AI systems in the service of ADA compliance, but that a lot of these, there's still concerns about how effective some of these AI systems are in meeting those sort of ADA requirements for a variety of different reasons. So we've also seen when like urban AI for transportation is incorporated into different cities, and I think this was a case in, it might have been a case in Rio, but don't quote me on that, I'm not 100% sure, where the urban AI systems for mobility, for like traffic flow and safety and things of that nature were incorporated only in the most wealthy areas and not in some of the lower economic areas. So they're uneven in their urban patterns of benefits as well. So one of the things that we could think about in terms of biases, and this is just a very, very like minor example here, we're looking at a model of from a company called BriefCam that works with camera and AI technologies to create these dashboards. But if you look at, you can't really see it very well, but in this bottom left, I guess it is, there's all of this different categorization of what the sensors are seeing. And the categorization in the dashboard is not very inclusive, right? It's woman, man, car, bicycle, truck. So we still see these sort of like when you're software sorting people in different types of mobilities, you know, you're counting and you're assessing the number of objects, but you're not really, you know, kind of differentiating what is going on there. So I'm going to skip a couple of things. So one of the things that we're also kind of thinking about here is that we have that most cities have ableist geographies, right? There's a lot of work that supports this, that people with disabilities are often thought about these sort of non-normative bodies, non-normative types of mobilities, and that they're mostly outliers within these systems. And that when you do see these sort of assistive technologies, like a curb cut, for example, being kind of incorporated into physical spaces, there is a benefit for everyone. I mean, even robotics manufacturers are saying, oh, the curb cuts are actually really helpful for us as well. But we do see a lot of this sort of recognition of differential mobilities, limited mobilities, people with disabilities as being outliers within these systems. So there's no guarantee that we're going to see any sort of attention to different types of mobilities being incorporated into artificial intelligence systems. So that's something that disability activists are very concerned about. And we do see, I mean, Anthony tells me, you showed us that computers are very good at seeing certain things, but they don't see everything, right? So some of the things that people have brought up is that even though we have these algorithmic systems, these like geo AI systems that can count curb cuts and tell you where they are, they're not always accurate, that they also don't know anything beyond the counting, that they don't really know a lot about how these things are used, that they're not incorporating qualitative information about lived experience or local knowledge in the way that we heard about before. So some of the calls around AI systems, and I know I'm running out of time, but some of the calls around AI systems has been to keep them open technologically, that because there's sort of such a heterogeneity of mobility and creative uses of the city, that these systems that are designed to kind of orchestrate flow or orchestrate mobility or understand urban rhythms should be hackable. They should be able to be open and transformed and mutable by people to make them fit meaningfully in their everyday lives. There's assistive technologies that are also smart, that are trying to both capture what people are experiencing as they use these assistive technologies on the streets, some of which seem a little bit, I mean, dare I say, ridiculous in some senses, where you have a drone flying over somebody who's a wheelchair user. This is an actual prototype from a Swiss company. Others are about sort of visually impaired, to sort of telling you what you're seeing as you move through space, but also collecting information about how people with a variety of different disabilities move through spaces. So some of the things that we want people to think about as they're designing these technologies, and I'll close without probably going over everything, but we could come into this during the Q&A, and maybe the discussion is kind of thinking about these normative templates and thinking about how they've existed not just in the technologies and not just in the spatial infrastructure, but also socially as well. And that some of the barriers to using AI or some of the conflicts and harms that might come up are maybe social and not just technological fixes. So thinking about what we're proposing is thinking about these categories of access, awareness, and agency as ways to kind of reflect on some of the projects that we've heard about earlier today and some that we will in the future, and sort of see like, okay, well, what are these kind of glitches, or what are these sort of intentionalities in designing these systems that aren't really accounting for differential access, awareness, and agency? And really, what do these terms mean now when we're thinking about these invisibilized systems that are operating within environments that are not catered to everyone to begin with? So I'll end there, and maybe we could talk more later about other things. Okay, thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Wen. I'm currently associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. So I guess what I have been studying is how to link human mobility with air pollution. So air pollution is an invisible threat. In fact, globally, every year, more than 80 million people were killed by air pollution. And among them, actually more than 700,000 individuals are children under age of 5. So then it's a big problem. And then the question we're trying to, or we need to address is, and probably always going to be, like who gets to breathe the clean air and who has been left behind struggling with the air pollution. So for my whole academic career, I have been studying human mobility. So where people are going, where people are visiting, why people go in some places, when people don't go some places. And but since 2020, 21, I started to get very interested in air pollution, air quality issues for reasons you probably all know. We have been working on it, and actually Professor Well and I submitted a proposal to NSF and got funded, which is on, it's called toxic-free footprints for urban communities, but it's trying to understand how we can make sure for every steps, for all the locations you're visiting, to understand the air pollution exposure and how we can, add intervention to reduce that. That happened in 2021, and then also by the end of 2022, collaborating with a few faculties at Northeastern University, we launched the iSuper Impact Engine. And iSuper here stands for the Intelligent Solution for Urban, actually to urban pollution for equity and resilience. Since 2022, since the launch of iSuper, a lot of things have happened. One big milestone is that, led by Professor Amy Miller, also my colleague, we have installed about, or maybe a little bit over 200 air sensors. It's called Quant EQ in 2 communities around Boston. One is Brookline, and the other is Chelsea. We intentionally put the sensors there to compare, the air pollution issues in the 2 very different communities. Of course, if you are interested in more of the iSuper, I'm happy to tell you more. But come back to the NSF project we have been doing. We conducted a Boston Walk study, collaborating also with another group at MIT. So in this study, we basically invited about 1,000 individuals, participants, to collect their demographic information. Also ask them to install their an app on their phones to track their visits, their mobility, and we get over 155,000 visits, stops. And then we combine that with air pollution data from EPA Monitor, from Purple Air, from Quant EQ. there are, we're still working on the analysis. We have some preliminary results. I'm happy to share with you more. But that's basically what we have been doing. Thank you.
Dr. Matic, next.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rana Matic, and I'm visiting associate professor at Northeastern School of Architecture. My work really sits in the intersections of design and health, individual, community, spatial health. And today I will be sharing some insights on the work I've been working for several years now alongside Dr. Lily Song, who leads Anti-Displacement Studio here at Northeastern. We are working on a internally funded project called Reclaiming Open Public Spaces in Boston Chinatown in Asian American communities, but we focused in the seed grant on Boston Chinatown, and kind of building on Ryan's comment, Boston Chinatown is one of those neighborhoods that has the poorest air quality, lowest tree canopy, and open space per capita among many Boston neighborhoods. So I would like to hear about your findings on the air quality research. We began really studying how are people using the open public spaces in Boston Chinatown, who is using them, and how those spaces really support issues of cultural identity and sense of belonging, as well as social resilience. We spent months collecting data, observations, behavioral mapping. I wish we had AI to help us. We did it like old school, manual way with a lot of students in School of Architecture. And as we listen more deeply in conversation with community members and community forums, we realized that physical environment is just telling us the part of the story. The bigger issue was something called commercial gentrification. So not just rising rents, but actually disappearance of cultural anchors in communities like Boston Chinatown. So think of dim sum restaurants, herbal stores, ethnic grocery stores, all those spaces that have made Chinatown feels like home to many community members. What we learned that it wasn't just a neighborhood, it was actually a cultural ecosystem. These small businesses, informal gathering spaces is something that sociologist Ray Oldenburg calls third places. So these are not homes or workplaces. These are really social spaces where community life unfolds. So we started asking what drives now people to visit Chinatown? What happens when family-owned bakery closes and gets replaced by a boutique cafe? And how those shifts actually affect the people's sense of belonging in these neighborhoods? What we heard over and over is sense of loss. People spoke not just of change, but erasure, this kind of displacement that happens without someone moving. So you're still in your neighborhood, but you end up kind of feeling like living in a space that doesn't belong to you. It's not your neighborhood anymore. So when a park is technically public and very few elders linger, that really starts to bring questions like who feels welcome and invited to use those spaces? When your favorite grocery store gets replaced by Whole Foods or Trader Joe's, do you really start being slowly pushed out of your neighborhood and even not physically, but culturally? So this is commercial gentrification, very often invisible and early sign of change of a neighborhood. And it really replaces cultural fabric even before the building starts to change. So to bring this back to this panel, how do we use AI to protect not only who stays, but what stays in the neighborhood, and how we can use AI to kind of not just surveil neighborhoods, but to kind of embed this intelligence? What if Boston Chinatown could be used as an urban sensor, networked space that AI supports cultural resilience of community members rather than market efficiency? I will kind of end this with, thank you, with kind of two provocative questions. What if urban intelligence wasn't about tracking how people move through spaces, but understanding why they gather in certain areas? And what if our smartest cities are the ones that learn how to remember? Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll turn to Professor Ledante.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Ledontek. I'm a professor in computer science and in design. And kind of my home discipline is human-centered computing. And so some of what I'm thinking about is really from the perspective of how do we build tools to support communities as they're trying to advocate for themselves and either affect policy change or address kind of local issues. And the thing that I've been wrestling with recently is kind of looking back over the kind of collection of projects that I've worked on over what is nearing decades. It's been a number of interventions where we've really focused on building tools to support data use and kind of the access and the agency piece around data. And over again, what we kind of find out is that this isn't solving the problems. And so the provocation that I've kind of landed on, today and that I'm wrestling with kind of more generally is that, at the extreme, the data just doesn't matter, right? And I think this is to the point earlier that it's about the other kinds of things that communities need and organizations need to be effective, whether that's support for organizing, support for mobilizing people that aren't, in fact, data problems. And the challenge that we have with a lot of the kind of technology first interventions is that they frame all of the problems that we face in our communities as data problems, as computational problems. And what that does is at least within kind of the spaces that I work, is it forecloses on a number of other options or opportunities that we might think about how technology can support local activism and local agency. And so I think especially now, like some of this is coming out of the work in smart cities where it's like, oh yes, we need all of these data resources and we need dashboards and so what happens is those data are really compelling to technical experts, right? Ourselves included. And so we think, oh, they must be also compelling to community groups and organizations, but they don't have the expertise. So we need to build the expertise. So we're spending all this effort and resource in building expertise so that they can affect change. And all of these things are kind of swirling around each other in a way that is in some ways very much like the example that Anthony showed from Google about if we can just know how traffic moves, we can operate on it, and the right data with the right people leads to the right decisions. And that's a kind of modernist conceit that doesn't hold true anymore. And I think that's one of the things that as we move into this next era where intelligence is now kind of pervasive in the tools that we're using, how do we capture and maintain this idea that there are other types of solutions, other social infrastructures, other organizational infrastructures that we need to support beyond just operating with data.
Thank you. Those were great brief interventions, ideas, concepts for thinking about the ideas we've heard around urban AI. And maybe I'll first invite Germaine, if you'd like to respond to any of those thoughts.
Yeah, hi. I'm sitting kind of awkwardly facing all of you, but maybe I don't know if I should change or not. So one of the things that I heard through all of these and really interesting projects by all of you, and I hope we get a chance to talk more about them later. I mean, one of the things that I hope urban AI does is sort of everything you said, which, I mean, on a very basic level, I mean, what we've seen in some of the examples that we heard just now and before is what I hear at least is that all of this automation of data gathering and counting and sensing opens up or could open up a lot of institutional space and money for qualitative data research. So maybe I think that because I am doing qualitative data, I interview people, I talk to people, but in our paper about disability studies, one of the things that we propose is, yeah, listen to people who have a variety of different disabilities and move through the city in different ways, and why an intersection that has curb cuts might not actually be effective because of all of these other reasons. But I love what you're saying about this. There are social problems, right? These are social problems. These are institutional problems. This might be not about more data. There's also privacy issues in gathering protected data, right? But that may be what urban AI is good at, is speeding up and making more efficient data gathering processes so that we can do the harder work that often municipal officials say, I don't have time to interview all of these people. I don't have time to sort of sit and do these kind of studies where I actually find out why people gather within Chinatown or what they remember about this place. But maybe that we can harness these technological solutions for what they do well, which is not necessarily tell us very kind of textured information about urban spaces, but give us that sort of surface level, use them as a starting point rather than an end point, right? To open up other sorts of processes of knowing and keeping intelligence sort of human, but in a collaborative way where we're offloading some of the grant writing is a great example, right? Some of the things that might help us do everything else. But I still think thinking about these sort of categories, not just about access, agency, and awareness, but I think that's a good sort of starting point to start questioning, like, well, what do we still need to know once we've gathered all of this really like complex data and processed all this complex data that we couldn't have done before? Like, what are the remaining questions that are about everyday intelligences that a computer couldn't measure because it will never be programmed to understand? So that's one thing that I was thinking about as all of you were talking, but yeah, I want to pass it back to the panelists too.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And we'll go to the audience in one sec. I'll just make one question or thought myself, which is, I think there was a question to the earlier talk that Anthony Townsend gave, which was about how are people involved at the moment of designing or creation or thinking about what tools are needed or how are we going to use them or what questions are we asking? And I wonder if any of you want to comment on that in your work or your projects.
I can speak to the projects that I've worked on, and you know, the methods that I use and that we use in my lab are, you know, based around participatory design. So they're very focused on working directly with community members and organizations to first even understand what is a research question that's meaningful to those groups and those organizations. I think the thing that still is a challenge, though, is that as soon as you come in and say, hey, I'm a computer scientist and I work with technology and I want to help you solve problems, everyone's immediately thinking in terms, excuse me, of data and computing. And so and there's just like, oh, well, if we had that data, or if we had this capability, we could do things more effectively or more efficiently. And sometimes it's efficiently, and what they should be saying is effectively. And so this is where, you know, the thing that I keep wrestling with at this stage is how do we move from from that kind of design intervention language, how do we move from assuming that data is the thing, is the material to work with, is the pathway to an answer, to figuring out what are the kind of organizational and social pieces that need to be supported, and how does, if and how does computing fit into that part, right, into that network building, into the kind of communications piece. I think the other thing that I'm trying to wrestle with too is that if we move away from data as a solution, then data just becomes another medium, right? It's just a form of media. And so it requires a different kind of media literacy. And that's important to acknowledge, but also media literacy doesn't lead to transformation. And so if we're trying to get to transformation, there have to be other levers that we need to identify and pick up on.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, treating data or even urban AI and the media not as a solution. Another reason we want to do that is maybe the AI also have its bias. We actually did a very simple experiment. We gave different names associated with different ethnicity to AI and asked it to assign for these two people, which one you will more associated with a wealthy related point of interest, which one will more of a low-income point of interest. No doubt, a lot of times, certain ethnicity has been assigned to a certain group, and that percentage actually amplify the disparity we see in real life. So before we addressing that, or we know how to control that, I think it's pretty dangerous to just say AI will be the solution. So I couldn't agree more.
I really like your comment about using qualitative research. I do that in my own research. We all know how time-consuming, consuming in any possible way. So if we could start with AI that actually help us kind of first look at like people leave comments, there is like a lot of like platforms where we could actually scrap all the comments and use AI to kind of process and detect the feelings of cultural displacement, perception of the neighborhood changes even before we go into neighborhood and interview community members. Usually that at that moment is usually already too late. So we can actually use it as a start point to identify those areas at risk and where we should be kind of focus on and paying our attention. So.
Okay, so now I think I would love to open the conversation to the audience. And I saw a hand up here. Maybe introduce yourself before you speak.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Moira Zellner. I'm in the policy school here at Northeastern, and a lot of the work that I do is participatory modeling. So integrating computational modeling within participatory processes where people just build models together, combining their knowledge with computation, with data where applicable, to try to have a bigger picture and understanding of the complexity of the problem that they're part of, and then be able to deliberate on solutions. And I've been listening to, the keynote, the different presentations, and the panel. I'm very intrigued. Of course, Chris has talked. We have talked a lot, and so we very much align. But I go back, and you started talking about that, but I would like to just really dig deeper into this aspect of like data as a medium, because 10 years ago or more, and having conversations about the beginnings of participatory modeling with stakeholders on flooding and water sustainability, one of the planners was saying, like, when do we have enough data to make decisions? Because again, it's like, it's not about continuing to amass data. We have a humongous amount of data, and that's not the issue. The lack of data is really not the issue for a lot of the decisions that we have to make. Going back to the idea of like the trees, for example, and I was thinking as a former ecologist that, trees are great, but only if you can keep them alive. And right now we're going to, aspects of climate change that really threaten that. And so what's the point of amassing all of this data about trees if they're going to die? Right? If we're reaching such extremes that they're not going to even be there. So part of me that is what I worry about with this technology, and I was wondering how you're thinking about this, is that it seems to just be perpetuating what we've done before. And what it's doing in terms of the disruption is just the speed at which we are going to crash against the wall. But we're still going in the same trajectory. We're not really changing it and questioning our models of development that are growth-oriented, that are the foundation of the problem that we're in. And so that's, I just wanted to put that there and see what you all think.
I love that you said that, because for a number of reasons. But I mean, one of the things that I've written about before is, so what, right? So we know all of this stuff, and we know it maybe faster, more efficiently, more completely, maybe, than we had before. And we have beautiful visualizations to refer to show that, right? But if we don't have the institutional backing to address those changes, right? If you still don't have a budget that is about growing and maintaining trees, if you still don't have budgets for fixing and manpower and whatever for fixing these problems, and an institutional value system or politics that supports the fixing of these problems that the data has revealed in stunning imagery, then you're not going anywhere. It's like, so that question of how transformative are these things. And I also like it because one slide I didn't show, it was just the words, but I'm the PI of a working group at Michigan where we're thinking about this concept of reparative AI, right? Reparations, not just as a legal framework or policy framework, but as an ethics of repair. So when we think about artificial intelligence through that group, we're thinking about things like housing and urban AI and racial justice and food and cities, but thinking about like, well, maybe the transformation is at the level of the institution, maybe it's at the social level, right? And so when you think about reparative AI as a shift away from technology towards, well, let's see what yes, the underlying biases and glitches and fixes are, but also moving away from technological solutionism, which is really standardized and often not very transformative, but thinking about how do we transform institutions to organize against allocative harms, about racist representational systems, oppressive algorithms, and things of that nature. So I love this shift. I mean, maybe it's my background in sort of urban sociology, urban geography, anthropology, media and cultural studies, but that idea of it's, the media is very revealing of a lot of underlying social injustices. And maybe we have to deal with the social injustices. So the changing the world sort of thing is not about changing the technology, but more changing the things that the technology reflects. So I really appreciate your comment. Thanks.
Okay, are there other audience questions? Yes, there's a mic there.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you all so much for this panel. I'm a first-year PhD student at CAMD. I work with Meryl Alper and Michael Andevito. And this, because I'm in the disability studies and how it intersects with technology, I was actually wondering, Dr. Halegoua, if you could, I guess, expand on one aspect of the experience of disability. So I think what you touched on a lot is the invisibility of disabled body minds. But then I'm also curious about how we address the issue of hypervisibility, where there's a tendency toward surveilling people with disabilities.
I think that's a major concern, right? So, I mean, concern, and there's a lot of things wrapped up in that question. So one of the things we thought about, and I'd be interested in talking to you after more, I love Meryl Alper's work. Like, I think it's wonderful. And she's been inspiring, her work, and Liz Elsesser also has been inspiring us and thinking about access in particular, but also like that a lot of the issues are not just technical, but socio-technical. But thinking about hypervisibility. So one of on the slide that I showed where the smart assistive technologies, they're all wheelchair users, right? So that would be one example of this sort of like hypervisibility of apparent disabilities, right? Apparent body minds that are sort of impacted by the mobility structures and infrastructures in particular ways. And I think that in a lot of cases, the technological solutions are meant to sort of fix the most visible, right? And people talk about curative violence when it comes to disability, right? I think we see a lot of curative violence in urban AI systems around the most apparent disabilities. But I think one of the things that come up, and this is something we've been talking a lot about, is privacy issues, right? So when you're if the point of addressing, it's a different sort of form of curative violence. If the point of addressing disabilities, a variety of non-apparent disabilities, is the point of these sort of like AI systems, then you're going to have to find out more and more and more and more and more about these protected categories. And you're then going to be maybe software sorted into all of these other restrictive categories. So I think this problem of making a non-apparent ability or a non-apparent disability hypervisible is actually really harmful, can be very harmful, but under the guise of being helpful. So I think it's a complex question. I love that you asked that question. That's just one thing we've been thinking about, is this issue of when you make something more public within a coded system, or more visible within a code ramifications, maybe for Social Security, maybe for insurance, maybe for health policy, right? So that's something to be thinking about too.
Okay, and there's another question back there.
Hi, I'm Morgan. I'm a postdoc in communication studies. I was just curious if you all, or any of you all, could talk about a little bit more about the meaning of race and disability in AI. It seems to me that is something that you all touched on, at least indirectly, in part of your presentations, from particular neighborhoods you're looking at to particular cities like Detroit. So I was just curious if you could speak to that a little bit more.
Gonna pass it back to you and your comment about when you were running the test where there's that intersectionality of, you showed I don't know if you, I don't want to step on your toes, but yeah.
Yeah, we so I introduced the study that we test ChatGPT if there are bias. We actually find out not only have bias, but actually amplify the bias more than what we observe in the real world. But for the mobility and air pollution study, we also try to look at, air pollution exposure across different type of neighborhoods, what it's like. I can go into a little bit more detail, but one thing we find is that during the weekdays, higher income, higher education population actually exposed more because apparent reason they're commuting, they're traveling. But then once weekend, everyone is at home at their residential neighborhood, then we see the air pollution exposure in the non-white neighborhoods much higher than people from the white neighborhood. So there's definitely a lot of disparity here. And then that's also why I mentioned that for the iSuper project, we try to compare Brookline, which is, relatively wealthy neighborhood compared to Chelsea, which is more diverse neighborhood. And we see consistently across different type of air pollutants that the levels in Chelsea is much higher, right?
Hey, while the audience are thinking of more questions, I would like to ask another question about pedagogy and pedagogical approaches, because you're all coming from sort of different disciplinary directions and asking kind of intersecting questions. And as we are educating the next generation of folks who will be building AI systems as well as doing qualitative research, I just wonder, how do you teach students to think the way you're thinking, to see what you're seeing? Are there any innovations pedagogically in the use of AI in classrooms, in project-based learning, in community-based research that you might want to speak to?
Again, so I don't have like a philosophy how we can teach this. I think it's just moving too fast. But what I observe, I'm actually the chair of the AI Advancement Committee in my department, and we're trying to figure out how we can use this and help students to effectively use AI. What we find is that, again, we have a very small time window to introduce the right way for them to use, which is as a personalized teaching assistant, tutor, help you to figure out, if you don't understand something, how can you effectively use AI to help you understand it? Before, I think it's important to let them know that through this way, that's the only way you can master knowledge, you can learn the logic behind the knowledge. Otherwise, they're just going to throw something at the AI and then give me an essay, something like that. So,
yeah. And just, to expand on the others who you might not be actually teaching AI to students, which you're doing in computer science, obviously, but I'm really curious about how we can think of AI as something we use in outside the classroom, right? And what does it mean? Not just, all right, students using it to do their work in the classroom or whatever, but as people who are engaging with urban AI, with mobile AI, with like situated AI, how do we begin to think about that?
Yes, as you said, I like the group of students and researchers we were not using AI. We really used like kind of old school interviews and going to community. We even our students who were conducting interviews we recruited on purpose Asian American students. So our interviews were offered in English, Cantonese, so we kind of get wider community reach, kind of understanding the many members of the Chinatown maybe don't speak English, or maybe they feel comfortable more like kind of being interviewed in their native language. So what I really like with this approach, that our like kind of initial set of questions shifted from like, we wanted to understand how they're using public spaces, but they kept talking about cultural displacement, erasure of small businesses. I feel like maybe AI doesn't have this flexibility. If we started kind of like doing that, so this is this kind of human touch, or like where we are still maybe smarter than AI. So I like how like focus really shifted on something. We really listened what community was telling us. We came like, oh, we really want to know this. Community was like, no, we really want to talk about that. So I don't know, I guess my pedagogical takeaway was this flexibility that was embedded in the research process, but I'm definitely kind of not open, but like craving to understand how we can like use AI to expand the pool of responses, kind of save some of the time and resources that, you know, qualitative research requires.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a good answer for this either. I think the challenge is that the tools are moving so quickly, they haven't settled yet. So I don't know, I don't have a set of things that I would say, here, let's go use them. The other piece too is that often, especially when I'm, you know, working with students who are coming from computer science or a technical background, they're technically proficient already, and what they really need is training in how to talk to people out in the world, and so that's what we spend our time doing. I'm not worried too much about them mastering the technology, you know, part of it. And so I don't know what to do with technology, with the AI piece just yet, in part because the tools are, you know, so rapidly evolving, and we're not yet, at least in my set of things that I point people to, we're not at the level where we have those small kind of, you know, the fruit fly versions of these solutions that we can point at very specific places and say, let's go work with that.
I mean, I guess I'm coming from like a media studies, communication studies department. So a lot of the teaching I do is about sort of looking critical cultural studies of media, right? So one of the, I teach like digital cities classes and things like that. So one of the things that we do is, well, two things I guess pop into my head. One, and this kind of speaks to, I think it was Morgan's question, Morgan, right? About sort of race. I mean, one of the things we do is we sort of use, we pretend, I mean, we sort of profile, we pretend that we're traveling somewhere and we sort of type into ChatGPT like, okay, give me the names of all the Black-owned restaurants in Detroit, and it returns 3. And we're like, okay, so what's the problem with that? Like, we know that that's not true. What's it, you know, so almost like an audit, but like in a very cultural studies sort of way. But then also looking at the sort of institutions that use AI or algorithmic systems for very high stakes, what we consider like high stakes decisions or wicked problems. So kind of looking at, one exercise we did was kind of looking at the, and I'm blanking on what the program is called, but it's like risk assessment for homeless populations. So looking at these sort of like automated ways of assessing risk and vulnerability indexes for homeless populations to decide how they get a scarce resource of a bed in a homeless shelter. And sort of seeing like, okay, well, this is sort of the outputs, reading like, audits that have been done on those systems that are about race and class and mental health and sort of like what gets picked up in the system. Why is it saying that this person is more vulnerable than that? Why is, you know, and then kind of doing these kind of, I guess we'd call them like cultural audits of these algorithmic systems, and then looking back to see like, okay, well, then what does the survey look like the social worker is using to interview this person? And like, why would somebody of color answer that question differently? Like, why would somebody who's been in a domestic violence situation not want to answer that question authentically, right? So kind of working backwards to see like, where are the other kind of problems within these institutionalized systems and social systems that then get coded and recoded into the AI. So very much almost like a Sophia Noble, Ruha Benjamin idea, where we're sort of looking and seeing like, where's the new Jim code, right? Like, where are these sort of institutional biases and social biases re-encoded into the AI systems, and how do they become more brittle and harder to break and more harmful in some ways?
Yeah, which, I mean, that speaks to a kind of like reverse engineering in a way of how we got to the tools we have, and then how do we back up and do it differently, maybe.
Audit, but an audit. It's not complete enough to be an audit, but more of like a reverse engineering, maybe on a small scale.
Yeah. Okay. Here's another question over here. Microphone's coming.
Hi, my name is Brooke Wells. I am a professor of communication and the Senior Associate Dean for Research and Partnerships for CAMD. My question, it's a little bit half-baked, which is why it took me a long time to raise my hand, but I'm wondering about the sort of balance of work for the non-academics, right? So not the researchers, the participants, the community members, and all that. And it strikes me that one thing AI does really well is it like does the work on background systems. So like the work I'm doing with Ryan, it's like although the people need to walk around and things like that, it's just sort of tracking them along the way. And it doesn't, they need to do almost nothing other than install the app. So as we think about a moment when folks are skeptical about academia and skeptical about the value of academic research, I wonder how we balance the demand of things like qualitative research or community engaged research against the AI tools, especially in light of Chris's observation that the data often don't actually matter and don't result in meaningful change. So that's the question. I would love to hear your take on what we do.
I mean, I think the engaged piece of the work is actually really important, right? And so the skepticism of the academy and the skepticism of the sciences more generally, and we could treat that as a messaging problem. And the more engaged we are with the communities that we're working and serving, the easier it is to kind of communicate the value of what we do and the value of how these different kinds of knowledge come together. That said, I think it's also important to do the work to not let the kind of technical knowledge displace the local knowledge. And I think that was something that's been kind of brewing throughout the conversation today. It's certainly something that we're working on. So Eric Gordon, who you'll hear from later today, he and I are working on a project here in Boston, and it's very much kind of at the center of that project is how do we get to the local knowledge and the local experience that residents in a neighborhood have about safety, and not let the kind of official counts of incidents kind of trample that in a tool that helps communicate about those experiences. And so that work is very much about those relationships and very much about communicating the value of that local way of knowing. And then the work that we're doing to say, like, we're here to serve you, right? We're here doing this work with you and bringing our skills on behalf of you, that builds that relationship and hopefully shows that it's worth doing.
So yeah, I could not agree more. The thing that I've been thinking, like, that very often when we go to communities, we position ourselves as experts, and we have this like kind of top-down approach. Like, we need to really acknowledge and respect the local knowledge, and really the local community members. They are the experts. We should facilitate the process, but not lead it. Very often they feel like a guinea pig, like, like, again, they're like doing some research on this community, like under the zoomed in. So that's very hard to avoid that feeling. It takes a lot of time to gain the community trust. I've been working across different marginalized communities in past several years. I work in Black communities in Atlanta, and I'm working in Chinatown. So it takes a lot of time. And then when you gain that trust, you need to kind of deliver results. Very often we disappear and we publish papers and present at conferences. We don't give back to the communities. So this is some things we should kind of be aware of as researchers, that we're just really not experts and we don't know everything, or if we know anything. So my takeaway.
I don't have a good answer as well. I do feel like I'm very pessimistic about institutions, but I have more trust and optimism towards people, because for the project, we only offer $25 Dunkin' Donuts gift card. And then on Facebook, one big group, they put our ad on there, laughed at us, but also said, I think there's a good cause. I can use $25. I'm going to help them. So that's, make me feel like when we really help individuals to see that the work we're doing and we're trying to make it right, people will come up and help. And another thing in our project, we collect data from this 1,000 individuals, and then of course it's very sensitive, right? With demographics, with age, and their whole trajectory. But we also promise, and I think we're very close to achieve it. Yeah, we want to run all the model, all the algorithm, all the machine learning framework we developed on the phone locally. So no data will be collected to a central server. Every analysis will be done on their phone. It's a very engineering-driven solution. But at least I guess we take step by step. We try to address some of the concerns at least.
Yeah, Anthony.
Hi, thanks for a great discussion. I wanted to ask about something which I'm surprised hasn't come up yet this morning, which is the new capabilities that AI presenting for not so much on the data gathering, but the data analysis task through low code, no code, basically making it easier for people to build tools to analyze data. And I guess the question is is this something that's coming up in your work? Are you seeing the sort of expertise get disseminated to a broader group of researchers? Are they doing new interesting things? And is that potentially a platform for kind of participation in this that might advance some of the goals, basically letting non-experts build the tools that will analyze data to create the insights?
I don't know that we're there, or at least in the projects that I've been working on, I don't think we're there yet. In part because you still need enough expertise to assess what comes out of those tools. And so you can do a thing, but it's hard to know if the thing that you've done is actually worth working or accurate or reliable. And so that's the piece that we're closing the gap on, I'm sure, but is still not, it's not a throw it over the wall and look at everyone can use it and yay, we've democratized this. There's still so much training and recontextualizing that needs to happen, that it may just be another case of, well, that's just never going to happen. It still requires that technical expertise. It's just a different kind of technical expertise.
I'll just add one thought, because I was going to ask about this also, that to preview a little bit of Adriana's work on mobile networked creativity, is that everyday people have over the years appropriated technologies that were designed to do certain things, and they've used them in other ways. They've used it themselves, thinking mobile phones as an example. And so I think that will be happening, right? And we don't yet know where it's happening or how it's happening. Maybe the tools are not quite accessible to people yet, but as they do get into people's hands, and so many people do have smartphones around the world, they will creatively appropriate whatever those AI tools are to do things that are surprising and unexpected, and put power back into their hands, maybe.
I was going to say, if you're looking, I love that you were doing forecasting models, the horizon scan, and looking for signals and things. I think one of the signals that we can look at, I don't know if it's a signal actually, but I think one of the things we can look at as almost a precursor to what you're implying is citizen sensor projects, right? So if we start looking at, I think I agree with both of what you're saying, but I think that kind of hyper local, or even just somewhat localized local knowledge as expressed through AI. I mean, you'll see projects. I don't know any off the top of my head, but if you look at sort of some of the citizen sensor projects in Barcelona or Korea, all over the world, you're seeing people using sensors in kind of creative, appropriative ways to sort of see okay, well, the asthma rates in my neighborhood are super high. Why is that? How does the sort of things that I'm tracking with my cell phone or my air sensor that some organization has given me, what can I do to figure out my, my vulnerability to asthmatic attacks and air pollution? I think you'll probably see that processing power coming, but it does take a huge amount of technological skills. So that speaks back to some of the things we were talking about building trust, or, you're going to have an expert come in and show communities how to use these. And then there's all of these other layered issues of, kind of trust in the institution and things like that. But I think that might be a future, right? That might be a future use, especially if these systems are so integrated within society, or become more integrated in society. But I don't know. I think there's a lot of power dynamics at work there too.
Vibe code our way to a better world. Is that the?
And
going on inside the box and all the bad stuff.
Yeah, if anyone didn't hear that, de-expertizing the making of these systems. There's a new word for us. And I just wanted to add on the flip side of that, of course, is the opacity that people may try to apply to not be swept up into the AI data collection and sensing. So the right to opacity is also a sort of creative appropriation in a way of another kind.
Can I add one more, maybe provocation? I don't know, but in reaction to this comment, I mean, so much, especially I'm from the humanities, right? Like so, and critical cultural studies, like so much of what we say about AI is about resistance and refusal. So if you just look at the number of books that have come out around algorithmic resistance, algorithmic refusal, it's huge. It's almost like that's the only way. And I don't think so. I mean, I don't know that that's always the answer in terms of asserting agency. Like, I think we do have to think sort of in the way that it sounds like you're suggesting, Anthony. Like, I think we do have to think about these spaces in between resistance and refusal, but also when resistance and refusal is necessary, but kind of thinking about creativity, thinking about collaboration, thinking about sort of, what was the term? De-expertizing, right? I know, did we just start something here? No, I don't know, like de-expertizing or sort of thinking beyond technological fixes. Like, I think there's a lot of space to do that, especially as we're going to see, I think we are going to see AI, urban AI sort of being used in a lot of different ways that we might not immediately feel a sense of control over. But I think to wholly think about just resistance and refusal is maybe not as useful as to think about like where and when is this necessary to use these technologies and creative sort of appropriative ways of using these technologies for social concerns that are meaningful, that matter. So.
Okay, last question over here.
I actually have two questions. So one of them is about this issue of appropriation of technology. And I feel like, are there existing technologies that people already are using and feel comfortable with that we can build a bridge to? That's my first question. And then my second question really kind of is a little bit of a more boring academic question, but you guys were talking about like, oh, and then all we produce is papers. I'm very interested in thinking about the sort of currencies of the realm in academia, and in our college in particular, in my department, which is art and design. I happen to be the co-chair of tenure and promotion, and one of the things I've been amplifying in all our new cases is public impact. One of our colleagues went up and they had like over 1,000 people had seen their exhibition at this museum, and that seemed more important to me than 5 people reading a paper. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on both that idea of, building a bridge to appropriative technology, and then like, what do we need to do in academia to make public impact a higher priority?
Okay, we have 3 minutes, so quick answers from anybody.
I can quickly answer. So our research, speaking of public impact, our research is actually currently informing the plan that Chinatown community organizations are putting in place in protecting and enhancing the public spaces. So it's more important than publishing a paper. We haven't published a single one yet. We will, but we're actually more excited about having this impact on informing the master plan for Chinatown. So.
Yeah, figuring out ways to count public impact really matters. Whether it's exhibitions or whether it's building those community partnerships and maintaining them over time. And how do we talk about that internally and manage that and celebrate that as something that is a constant negotiation.
Germaine, the last word to you, either on those questions or anything else you'd like to say, just to sum up thoughts on this whole panel and your talk. Thank you.
I don't know. I was going to sort of answer that, but then I think I'll save it. I think that one of the things that just emerged again for me, I loved hearing all of the comments. I loved hearing all the questions, but thinking, holistically about all of these systems as we have in critiques of any other system is important. And I think it is exciting to think about those sort of spaces in between kind of like oppression and appropriation, right? Like to think about sort of like what's going on in the middle, which we didn't talk too much about, but maybe for the rest of the day, like we could be thinking more, being more attuned to, you know, what are these kind of creative responses? What are these appropriative responses to some of the things that we're thinking about? And then also thinking beyond technology, right? Or thinking about technology as something that is inherently social, right? It is inherently about people and it's inherently institutional. So yeah, thinking about those institutions and those socialities as well.
And thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists. This has been a great discussion. And following this, we'll have a 15-minute coffee break. But first, a round of applause. Thank you.